So, hi everyone, Steve the Hurricane here. We're officially getting started in a minute or two. And for those of you who are watching on both GoToWebinar and Facebook Live with us, you see that I have my good friend Jared Ivanich, who's from A Place at Home Home Care. The reason why I had a franchisor on this particular webinar is because this webinar is for people who aren't in business yet. And every single day, we get phone calls at Hurricane Marketing Enterprises of people who are following us, people who they've been watching our videos and they're thinking about getting into home care. And so as a result of that, they tend to, hang on one second, I'm getting some feedback on your side there, Jared. Here in my ear, let me just put this down a little bit. All right, that's better. Okay, so we get people who call in our office all the time, and they are thinking about starting a home care business, or they've been watching our videos for months, and they're like, I want to go ahead and get started. And so I also have been working with, in the last 6 to 8 years now, people who are brand new startups. And so I brought Jared on here to share his insights when he's working with people brand new, because we want to make it so that if you do decide that you want to do this business, and I do say if you decide, because there's a lot of different businesses out there, this one is a very rewarding business if you decide to move forward with it. But if you do decide to move forward with it, we want you to be aware of the challenges that people face in that first year or two, so that it could help to make it so if you do move forward, you could do so confidently and avoid these costly, timely mistakes. And that's the whole purpose of this. Now, to you, Jared, one thing I want to say to you is today is Boss's Day, so happy Boss's Day.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, and to you as well.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Had some nice messages on Facebook from some of our crew in the Norris franchise group and A Place at Home corporate office today. I'll tell you one thing, we couldn't be where we are today without them.
Yeah. Amen. Amen. But all right, so we're just giving people a couple more minutes here to get started. Everything is beginning shortly. All right, so we see some folks over there. Let's see how we're doing over here. All right, so we have some folks on the Facebook Live as well. All right, so it's top of the hour, so let's just dive right into it. So everybody, I'm Steve the Hurricane. Many of you are aware who I am. I'm the owner and president of Hurricane Marketing Enterprises, and today's webinar that we're doing, this is a special webinar. It's not my typical webinar, because typically when I do a webinar, I do webinars for people who are already existing in business. But I know that there's a large portion of people out there who are thinking about getting into a home care business. And so if you find that you are somebody who wants to start a home care business, there are many intricacies, many challenges, and just many things that we want you to be aware of if you decide that you want to move forward with doing this business. And one thing I can tell you for sure, and I see that those of you who see me on Facebook and see me on the webcam over here, I'm just grabbing something out of my office real quick. You know, just to give you a little background about myself, I'm the author of a book called Why We Care, Choosing the Right Home Care Agency. I have been in the home care business for over 15 years now myself. I used to have a private pay, non-medical home care company. I started out as the director of business development in 2005, and then in 2009, I grew this company significantly larger than it was, became the vice president part owner. In 2011, I sold that company, and then in 2012, I left the company that we sold it to start Hurricane Marketing Enterprises. And for the last 7 going on 8 years now, we have trained thousands of home care companies around the United States and in 6 other countries on how to scale and grow their business. And we've helped these companies increase their revenues by more than $1 billion of what they were doing prior to working with us. And so we're very proud of the successes of all of our clients. And I put this webinar together to give you some insights about the home care business. Now, before I continue with it, I also want to introduce my guest presenter with me, Mr. Jared Ivanich. He's from Place at Home Home Care. He's one of the franchises that have a lot of spaces available still. He's up and coming, and they're just on the map doing things really hot. And because he's working with so many people who are getting into this business, I wanted his expertise to share with you out there who are considering getting into this business. So, hey, Jared, how you doing, buddy?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me today.
Excellent. Excellent. I'm looking forward to it. And so let's stick and move because everybody's here now and more people are populating in. And as they populate, we'll just continue to go forward with it. So first thing that I want to go over with this here, as everybody can see, is I want you to get to know what you're getting into. All right. When you get into this business, this isn't your typical business. All right. So when you think about business, most businesses are either a product or a service. This is clearly a service business. We're sending caregivers into people's homes to provide services for a patient to keep that person out of the hospital, to keep that person safe and sound. Now, the reason why I say you have to know what you're getting into is, this isn't the kind of business where, the business is open at 9 o'clock in the morning and it closes at 5 p.m. While those are office hours, we have to think the nature of this business. There are certain clientele that will be getting care overnight. There are certain clients that are going to be getting care 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, which means that although there's your business hours, your 40 hours that your office is open, there is a 24/7 nature to this business. And it's a nature of availability because if I have a patient that has an issue at 3 o'clock in the morning, say I have a patient that's actively dying, they're on hospice, and that patient passes away at 3 o'clock in the morning, and there's a caregiver, one of my employees in that house, that caregiver is going to call me. These are things that I want you to be aware of when you think about this business. Something else that I want people to think of when it comes to this business is understanding that it's not just placing a caregiver in the home. There are really three nuances to this business. The first nuance is, we have to get caregivers to work for us. And I'm going to talk as we go through this webinar here. We're going to go through the biggest mistakes that we find people make in the first year. But one of the biggest mistakes or challenges that people don't realize is we have to constantly be recruiting. Recruiting is a must for this industry. It's a must for this business. So one part of the business sale is getting people to work for us to fulfill the care. The second part of it is to make the phone ring. So home care, although every once in a while people will walk into the office, that happens, but it's not consistent like that. When you think about your traditional stores, your traditional businesses, you have a storefront and people are constantly coming in and out and you have traffic. Maybe you have web presence and people are buying things online. A lot of this business takes place in a patient's home or in a hospital or a rehab, which means that we have to actively be out there trying to find the people with the greatest need. So there are some traditional marketing things, and I'll go through this. There are some traditional marketing things that we can do that will work, but many traditional marketing things like ClickFunnels and pay-per-click ads and stuff, they're not as effective as other ways of marketing, and we'll get into it. But those are things that drive people traffic to us and to our company. And then the third part of this business is being able to now convince somebody who has a need to pay for services privately. Yes, there are some payer sources like veterans programs and long-term care insurance. But the vast majority, more than 80% of the revenue for this entire industry is out of pocket. And so it does take a sales level of comfortability to be able to quote prices for a service that comes into it. So, everybody who's thinking about getting into this business, understand the three things that I just said. First thing, You got to be recruiting consistently to get caregivers to do the work. And it's an ongoing, never ending process. Number two, you're going to have to do something to get people with need to reach you. And many of the traditional advertising methods that work for most businesses don't work necessarily in this business. And then the third thing is we have to be able to convince people and sell people on why they should pay for services to go with us. So understand those three sides of the business, and then also that this is a 24/7 natured business. So if you're the kind of individual who likes to have your business, and you could have like a storefront. Think of a traditional business like 7-Eleven or a convenience store, something like that, or even like a furniture store. If you like to open your store, do your business, close it, take care of the books after hours, maybe come in early and prepare for the day, and then that's it, and be able to be closed on certain days, this might not be the kind of business for you, at least initially when you're getting started. There's other things you can do, but just realize the 24/7 nature of this business. Jared, is there anything that you want to add to just some of the nuances of the home care business before I move on?
You've hit the nail on the head here. The three different sales are critical, not necessarily one being any more important than the other. We often think of ourselves, of course, as a senior care company, but first and foremost, we got to sell that caregiver. We got to have a happy staff. We got to have a staff that is willing to work for us and be able to go into that client and provide that excellent service. So we're very much, a caregiver service. We are a company in which we got to keep clients happy, caregivers happy, and of course, those referral sources happy. And it doesn't stop at 5 o'clock, So absolutely.
Awesome. And that's why I always want to put that out there to people. And now on the flip side of it, folks, this is one of the most rewarding businesses that you could ever do. What I loved about my home care business, and what I love when I go to visit my clients' offices, like last week I was in Mankato, Minnesota. Tomorrow I'm going to be in Atlantic City, New Jersey, visiting my clients' offices. What we do in home care, we take care of people. All right? These are people's parents, grandparents, aunts, and uncles. And even if they don't have any children, to our responsibility, I almost felt that I was a surrogate grandson or a surrogate son to my patients. I would come and visit them and see them. And even when they eventually passed away, like we're taking care of people at the end of life. For me personally, I went to school to be a minister, so having that pastoral background, it made it so that I was very empathetic with folks, and that pastoral training really helped at the end of life. Whether somebody was religious or not was irrelevant. It's usually a very spiritual time. But for me, I found there was a personal satisfaction that I received when I was able to help somebody pass away in the comfort of their home. For any person who's watching this, who's lost a grandparent or lost your parents, you know how difficult it is at the end of life. Like, people don't just drop dead anymore. There's usually a period of time where there's immense suffering, unfortunately, many hospitalizations where they're in and out again and again. The families don't know what to do, and they're beside themselves because mom, grandpa, my aunt or uncle, this is not who they were, and I don't know what to do for them. And when you get the opportunity to take somebody who's in a hospital, who's in a rehab or a nursing home, and help that person come home and keep them there for the remainder of their time, whether it be 6 months, 2 years, the weekend, whatever it is, you help somebody pass away in the comfort of their home, hopefully, God willing, in their sleep. That is a very sacred thing. It is something that most people don't get to do. Most people pass away in a hospital. Most people pass away in a nursing home. And those are things that many people want to avoid. We get to help fulfill that for people. So it is a very rewarding thing. You know, I think back to when I would go to some of my clients' funerals. One of my favorite clients, I actually wrote about her in the book when she had passed away. And I showed up on the day of the funeral, and her husband looked at me and he's like, Steve, I want you to know that my wife, she loved you, and she viewed you like a grandson. And they were on my services for like 3.5 years. And he said to me, you know, Steve, I would be honored, and I know Millie would be honored if you would be a pallbearer at her funeral. And so I ended up being the pallbearer at her funeral with her grandsons and her son and her husband. And you know, those are the things that you never forget. You know, this was we're talking 12 years ago when this woman passed away, and I was at that funeral, and I will never forget that for as long as I live. And that was a beautiful thing that she didn't have to spend all this time in the hospital because we had the care there at home to keep her home. You know, those are the things that are going to happen. So, you know, while, you know, I talked about know what you're getting into, and you know, this next slide here, you see, we're going to go through the 5 biggest mistakes that new home care business owners make. I want you to remember that saving grace, right? You know, yeah, it's a business. Yes, you can make good money with it, but ultimately, you're providing a service for your fellow man, and you're helping him or her do something that is not afforded to everybody. And so when we do that, you can go to sleep at night knowing that you're doing good. You're making the world a better place, one person at a time. And so I just want to, you know, share that with each and every one of you. So if you're thinking about it, let's get the nuances down so that I know what I have to do, because the rewarding aspect of it, it supersedes everything. All right, so I'm going to go through now with you the 5 biggest mistakes that I find new home care business owners make, so that if you decide you want to move forward with this business, you could do so ready and planned accordingly to make it happen. All right, so the first thing that I find that people do is they underestimate the cost associated with startup. This is the biggest one. I kind of put them in order. They're all important, but this one I feel is the most important one. Starting a home care business. Now, there's so many ways you can do it. You could do it yourself by getting a license and filling out the application and everything with the Board of Nursing, and then paying people to come out and get your accreditation and all this other stuff. And it'll cost you thousands of dollars, right? You can go through companies online that set up the business for you, and that'll cost you like $10,000 to $25,000. But that's not enough. Like when I started my company, Hurricane Marketing Enterprises, the company, you know, blow away the competition. Some of you have seen my videos, or you've invested in the programs and stuff that we've had, or maybe you've been to a boot camp, even though you're not open in business yet. A lot of people, you know, I talk about my startup costs. I started my company with $10,000, but a lot of people don't know I had about $150,000 in resources to get me through the first couple of years of business, because you don't know when you're going to start turning profit. Ideally, you know, and this is why I have Jared on here. Jared's a franchisor. Franchises tend to turn profit much faster than non-franchises, because there's a system and a model that they can follow, so you can turn profit faster. And Jared will speak about that in a moment. I'll turn it over to him. But I want you to realize that you really should have your startup cost initially. Then there should be funds set aside to at least cover the first year's worth of expenses. And then you also have to think about your living expenses, all right? Because that's a very huge one. You know, when I first started Hurricane Marketing Enterprises, I had the high life. I had a BMW M3 I was paying over $1,000 a month. I had an X5 that was like $800 a month that I was paying for that car. You know, I was always going on vacations and all this stuff because I had a high-powered job when I was selling my company Care Choice, and I was making 6 figures, like good 6 figures every single year, so I could afford all of that. But when I started my company, you go from making this salary to, wait a second, there is no business, there is no revenue coming in, and so you have to have money to get you. I'm on a webinar, so Yeah, it's okay. Don't worry about the Facebook. The webinar here. So I'll do what I can. So you have to make sure that you're prepared for your living expenses. Ideally, I would prefer that somebody gets lean first. Something that I know I did when I started Hurricane Marketing Enterprises is after the first year or so, I got real lean, went out, got rid of my expensive cars, got much more affordable cars, reduced my monthly expenses significantly to allow my company to get to a point where it's really successful and it's self-sustaining and it generates itself. I want you to think about this notion here too. You ever hear of the 80-20 rule? What's the 80-20 rule? 80% of businesses fail in a certain period of time, right? Only 20% of businesses make it past, we'll say, the first 3 years. To that point, because of this one right here, underestimating the costs associated with startup, I'm going to say that 50% of entrepreneurs who get started, they shouldn't even be in business because they didn't correctly set aside the resources to get the business started, and it never gets off the ground. From that, then you have 50% left over. 30% fail again because they're running out of resources, and the business could make it, but they run out of resources before they get to that break even and then tipping point, and then they end up falling short and they close and they go out of business. And so I cannot stress enough, like, you got to factor in marketing and advertising. You have to factor in recruiting costs. You have to factor in office space. And there's ways to do things so that's more affordable, like Regis shared office space and stuff. But you really have to factor it in. I personally recommend having at least $100,000 total for your first year. This gives you, $40,000, $50,000 to cover expenses, and then $50,000, $60,000 of living expenses to cover your cost of living for that first year until the business starts breaking even and making revenue, and then you could eventually put yourself on salary. That's a healthy figure. If you have more, again, if you have that 150, I think that's a real good cushion. But that's just what I recommend. So let me turn it over to Jared here, because you're somebody who, you have a franchise. You work with people all the time who are investing in your franchise. What do you say on this topic, Jared?
$150,000 is roughly what we consider to be the initial investment over from the day you start and launch in a place at home, all the way through about 3 months of operation. That also includes a franchise fee. So a lot of people who aren't franchising doesn't necessarily have that expense. But that being said, it takes time to get that referral market in line, to be able to get the word out, to be able to get people to trust you with their patients, with the people they know, and they want to make sure you're getting the best possible care. So even when you launch and you go into the market and you're starting to establish that base, you may get a few clients. You may have some digital advertising that's going to start dripping in, and that's great. But before you have that solid foundation, you need a good extra 2 to 3 months worth of living expenses. And we like our franchisees to actually have 8 months of living expenses in reserve from the time that they sign their franchise agreement till they launch. And if, for example, you're in a state like California, Oregon, maybe even Colorado, where some of the licensing timeframes are longer, you may even need a little bit more cash flow to get you there.
I'm so glad you had said that. I didn't even think about that aspect. This is why I like having another person with me. You also have to check with their state regulations. Some states are more expensive to get started than others. So the 150,000 number, you see me writing it on the board here, that's a good solid figure. If you're in a state like New Jersey, where to be a home care business, you have to become accredited. Accreditation is a $15,000 to $20,000 process. You got to add that on top of this. If you're in a state like California, just like you heard Jared say, there's other expenses that go into this, so this number can go up, but this is a good, healthy number as a good rule of thumb. If you really want to start this business successfully, this gives you enough cushion to get through, and it gives you enough capacity to give it the amount of time that it needs to start this business from the ground up. And putting businesses in perspective, I want to also touch on this. One of my friends who came over to watch a football game with me a couple weeks ago, he's an entrepreneur. I hang out with a lot of entrepreneurs. What can I say? I love small businesses. I'm fascinated by the economics of it and how it runs, and seeing people with small businesses and understanding it. And he bought into a franchise, not home care. He actually owns a business that does it's like a dog hotel in a nutshell. So people go on vacation and they need somebody to watch the dogs. They come to him and then they pay him to keep the dog, and the dog has activities, and they feed the dog and they take care of the dog and everything else, so people can go on vacations, or some people use it as like a doggy daycare. And he bought into this franchise, and he was telling me that he was expecting. Now get this, right here, you're talking $150,000, and some of you are thinking, oh my God, $150,000, that's a lot of money. He started his business. His franchise recommended $400,000 to start that business. He's been in business for 4 years now. And I asked him, I said, how much was your actual startup? And he goes, ironically, because of where he was located in New Jersey and all this other stuff, he has spent closer to $800,000 to really get his business going. And it was his third year when he finally recouped what he invested in his business. 3 years to get back to the breaking even point of what he invested. $800,000. If you see an Orange Theory Fitness or a CKO Kickboxing in your territory, recognize that kind of a business is about a $500,000 startup. When you see a Dunkin' Donuts or a McDonald's, just to buy into those franchises, you spend $1 million, not to mention the $1 million to build the actual self-sustaining building itself. So at the end of the day, while $150,000 may seem like a lot, when you look at all the other businesses that exist out there that many of us go to regularly, those entrepreneurs put out a lot more money. And you know what's crazy about that? The return on investment is almost the same. Many of them are not generating $1 million in total revenue every year, and the owner makes somewhere between $100,000 and $200,000 a year for themselves, unless they're a top producing franchise. And so, it's much greater risk financially. That's another thing that makes home care more attractive. But just realize it takes money to make money. All right, so I want to stay on time here. Have resources. We talked about that. Here's the second challenge that people face. And it's a mistake that I see. And I put down here waiting to begin marketing. And this is kind of what Jared was touching on before, and I'll let him speak in a moment about this. I find that there are so many people who contact us who say, I just got my license. What does it entail? I'm going to wait. I'm sorry, I didn't get my license. I just started my business. I'm going to get my license. Let me wait until I get my license, and then I'm going to start marketing. Then I'm going to start recruiting and start everything then. And the reason why I say that's a big mistake is because no matter what you do, and there's different types of marketing strategies. You see right here on the screen, this information that I'm sharing with you, this is straight from Home Care Pulse. Home Care Pulse is it's the benchmark for all things home care industry. They survey thousands of locations coast to coast. This is from the 9th edition. They do it every year for the last 9 years. And this is the information that comes out. Now, if you look at this, you see there's direct to consumer marketing on the bottom, which means you're reaching out to the people with the greatest need. And then on top, you see the referral sources. And really, the only thing that gives a great return on investment, as you see to the bottom here, is your internet marketing and your direct referral marketing. Those are the two areas that are going to give you your biggest bang for the buck. Senior directories, only 3% of the industry say that was their top referral source. Newspapers, 3%. Local magazines, 3%. So traditional advertising, like I said before, is not as effective in this industry as your search engine optimization, which gives you 25% of the people said that was their biggest referral source. Google AdWords, 15%. Said that, corporate website, if you're part of a franchise, 10% of the people surveyed. Those are good returns on investment. When you look at the top over here, the referrals from professionals and the revenue that comes from it. Take a look at like networking, for example, going to networking events. 27% of the revenue for the companies that said that was their top referral source. When you look at like hospice, 16%, home health companies, 24%. That's big, significant revenue. Everything that I'm saying on here, no matter where you are in the world, it's going to take 3 to 6 months for these marketing advertising companies or direct referral marketing to start coming in. What I always recommend to people is it's better to start your website, have your SEO, start creating content, have your Google AdWords going, have on the direct referral side, have relationships being developed at skilled nursing facilities and hospitals and assisted living communities. Skilled nursing facilities, you see this on here? The biggest return on investment is from skilled nursing facilities. If you're not a Medicaid waiver, it's 30% of the revenue from skilled nursing facilities. It takes 3 to 6 months to get referrals from those accounts. If I'm going to commit to this business today, and I'm getting an office, and I have literature and brochures, and I have a logo and all of that, start marketing today. Start developing those relationships today. Start your SEO and your website today. It's better to turn business away because you don't have your license yet than wait until you get your license, then take 3 to 6 months before you actually take on your first patient. It's when you start it today, you can actually go marketing. You can actually create connections and contacts so that when you get your license, you can have a grand opening and all of your referral partners can come to your grand opening party and say, guess what? We got our license today. We are open for business. We can accept referrals immediately. And you get that license today, Wednesday, and Thursday you get your first client. The people who do that, and I have many people who have grown their businesses to $5 and $10 million in like 4 and 5 years' time, they're the ones that started marketing and starting all of this stuff that you see on the screen right now prior to getting their license. And then once that license came in, that's when they started admitting and taking on patients. So that's my 2 cents on that. And that's why I say, because so many people wait, and it doesn't make sense to me at all, because you're going to wait either way. Don't wait till you get your license. Start it now. When you get your license, that's when you start onboarding patients immediately. Jared, is there anything you want to add to that?
The worst thing that's going to happen is you get a lead, right? And you can't service it. That's not a bad problem to have. If you've created a relationship and it allows you to start generating those referral sources to bring in those clients, that's what you want. And also, when you look at the time frame and you look at that initial investment when you're growing your company, if you're doing this on your own, you're making those marketing materials, you're designing your logo, you're figuring out your name, you're creating your LLC, you're doing all of these things. And if you haven't done it before, 3 to 6 months, add another 3 to 6 months just to get those things in line, let alone policies, procedures, and everything else. So when our franchisees launch in a state that doesn't have a license, in 60 days, we have all of those things completed. We have all marketing materials in hand. People are starting the referral marketing and they're getting out into their markets immediately, which is much different, for example, from when my partner, Dustin DeStefano, and I first started a place at home in the beginning. It took us over a year to get everything together. And yes, before we launched, we were out in the market. We were going out and meeting referral sources. And a lot of times we weren't even saying the right things, but it didn't matter because they were buying into us and our passion and our drive to be able to take care of people. And that's what they're going to be buying from you as well.
I love it. I absolutely love it because that's exactly it, my man, and it's so true. I love the way you put it there. If you're going independent and you decide to go that route, and you're doing it all yourself. And I think back to Hurricane when I first started my company. I did all of this stuff myself. There wasn't a company out there that really helped consultants to get started, or at least I didn't know that there was. So I had to do this myself. One of the first things I did though was find a contract before I quit my job. I already had revenue lined up. I already had clients lined up so that when I did quit and I could go right into it full force, billing was a technicality, and within like 2 weeks I was already receiving revenue. That's the best case scenario. That's what you can do. So just recapping, what do we want to do here, folks? Number one is you got to make sure you have enough revenue. Number two, start marketing immediately so you can slow the bleeding. And bleeding is a term that I use, meaning you're spending money and there's no money coming in. You're bleeding. You're bleeding out this $150,000. By the longer you wait to start marketing and advertising, the more bleeding you're going to do. And so we want to slow the bleeding off by marketing immediately. As soon as I commit to start this, once I get that papers, and you think about it this way, I can start a home care company legally with the IRS in 48 hours. Once it's an actual business entity, boom, start advertising and marketing and generating leads. Because once you get your license, then you can start taking them. And just like Jared said, you could always turn somebody away and help them find care with somebody else in the interim. But if you start it and you're getting those leads before you can accept it, imagine what happens when you can actually start taking it. Next one, I just want to make sure I'm mindful of the time here. Failure to establish minimums lacking a sales process. This one is something that not a lot of folks agree with me on it, and it's okay. I don't mind being the oddball out. I don't mind, because I have enough clients out there who I've worked with over the years who, I can say that I've done this before. I've been around. We've helped people grow by $1 billion. So you don't have to take what I'm saying and you don't have to do it. But I'm just telling you from my experience, I find that people who try to do everything run into huge problems. Here's what I mean. At the end of every day, doesn't matter who you are, doesn't matter if you're the richest person in the world or you are completely flat, broke, penniless, homeless person on the street. One thing that we all have in common is there are 168 hours in a week. You cannot add more hours to it. You cannot take more hours away from it. There's 168 hours in every single week. As a result of this, by not establishing a minimum number of hours of services, saying, oh, we'll take anything, we'll do an hour, we'll do this, we'll do that, even at an elevated rate, it becomes near impossible to staff and manage that. And so what happens is you have clients that have bad experiences because caregivers don't want that kind of work. Like, think about it from yourselves. Right now, you're anybody who's watching this, you're not in business yet, all right? So you're probably an employee somewhere or you're between jobs or whatever. Imagine if you went to apply for a job and the person said, I'm going to give you 3 hours of work. You have an hour and a half at this person's house and an hour and a half at that person's house. And I'm going to give you, even if I inflate it, I'll give you $50 for that hour and a half. And you say, maybe you may say, you know what, $50 for an hour and a half of work, I'll take it. You go there, and then the next day you're supposed to go there, which is like 3 days later, the person says, I don't need you today. So now you're not going to get it. And then they call you back a week later and say that they want to do this. This is what I'm talking about. And this happens all the time to people who don't have a minimum number of hours. Now, the reason why a lot of folks fail to establish a minimum number of hours is because they don't know how to sell, right? So they think to themselves, well, I got somebody calling in, and this all sounds logical, like it makes sense, but it you can't build a business around this, all right? You get somebody calling in, and they say, I just want somebody to come out and help my mom twice a week, give her a shower. It's 2 hours twice a week. Can they come out, maybe Tuesday, and they come out 4 days later? That's Saturday, right? And that's what I just said. Logically makes sense. I'm a family. My mom needs help with the shower. They're not seeing the big picture and everything else. They're just seeing mom needs help with the shower. I can't come out there. Can you come out twice a week and do this? That's not sustainable, all right? And you have to think from the sales process. I come out there, I see somebody. If someone cannot take a shower by him or herself, now think about what I just said. Every one of you watching this right now, you are physically capable, for the most part, of taking a shower yourself. You probably don't need help taking a shower. If someone is physically disabled to a point where they can't bathe themselves, what other things can this person physically not do? Like just talk it out. They're probably not able to drive, right? Because if they can't bathe themselves, they probably can't operate a car either, which means they're not getting to doctor's appointments. they're not grocery shopping, they're not running errands. There's probably a large need for that side of it. They probably, if they can't take a shower, they probably are unable to keep their house clean, which means that they're not doing laundry, they're not sweeping the floor, they're unable to stand at the kitchen sink and do the dishes and put them away. There's a lot of challenges there. Because they're not able to grocery shop, they're probably also not cooking properly, which means they're not eating 3 square meals like they should. And especially when you have somebody who's a diabetic or have certain conditions that many elderly have, they need to eat, and nutrition is a very important part of being able to remain independent at home. Like, this is an accident waiting to happen. If somebody is unable to take a shower, they're probably unsteady on their feet, which means they are a fall risk. Like, they can't take a shower, so they're stuck in their chair and they're wheeling themselves around their apartment, or they're using a walker, and again, they're an accident waiting to happen. They might not even be taking their medications on time. I mean, and that's just 5 things that we discussed off the top of my head, right? Off the top of my head. This is off the top of my head I came up with these things. This is where you have to realize this. Who is the expert when someone's calling into your company? You, as the agency that does this for a living as a profession, or the patient? You are. The agency is. Because you do this all the time. So when somebody calls in, and the example that I always use, and I love this example because we all can relate to it, right? Contracting. If you've ever had an addition put on your house, if you've ever had something go wrong in your house, here I am right now speaking to this, and my basement flooded again, and we have to replace the wall in the basement and everything else, right? That is a painful process. Every time something goes wrong in your house, you always hope and pray that it's going to be a couple $100 to fix it. But then you call a contractor, right? And the contractor comes out and they take a look at it, and 9 times out of 10, it's thousands of dollars to fix it, right? Have you ever renovated a kitchen before? Even if you do it yourself, you're still going to spend $7,000 to $10,000 on materials. If you pay somebody else to do it, I know I've done that. I've paid somebody else to do my kitchen. I spent $32,000 for my kitchen. It's an awesome kitchen, but I spent $32,000 on that kitchen, right? The countertops alone were like $6,000, right? So who's the expert here? We are the expert. And so when we come in, we have to take a look at the whole situation. And we also have to realize this. What is the ultimate goal for our patient? Like, why are they contacting us for services? It's because they have a need, right? Well, what is that need? Do you address one need, or do you address all the needs? The key to longevity is to address all the needs. If you heard me say this at the very beginning, if you have a client that comes on services, they stay with you for months and years and eventually pass away without ever having to move into a nursing home or ever having to go to a hospital for their last, time on earth, that's a win. That's what you're trying to prevent. We're trying to prevent hospitalizations. We're trying to give the patients and patient families peace of mind knowing that their loved one is okay. Because when they're worried and stressed out and we don't give them enough services and something happens to them, they cancel services and then they end up going into a hospital or a nursing home, or worse, something happens to them when we're not there. Now, I'll tell you, in my 7 years when I had my home care company, there were only 3 times when I told somebody that I saw that, and for us, we had a 20-hour minimum. It's 20 hours or you go with another company, because that's what we do. It allows us to shift. It allows us to take care of caregivers and everything else. There's a lot of things that go into it. I'll talk about that in a second. But, and I would tell people, like, maybe we're not the company for you. And there were 3 times where people agreed. Every other time people said, I love what you're doing. Yeah, we only wanted this, but you're right. Mom needs all of this. Let's move forward. And then what happened? They avoided the hospital, they avoided the nursing home, and they stayed home. Jared, is there anything you want to add to this before I move on and start talking a little about the caregiver nuances?
So it's about setting reasonable expectations with the client, and I think there's a big correlation between low hour clients or people who want those minimum shifts and people who have inconsistent schedules. Both of them could be headed for a disaster, right? Inconsistent schedules means inconsistent caregivers. Short shifts means unhappy caregivers, like you had mentioned. Who's going to drive across town for an hour and a half? Who really wants to fill that shift? You're setting up a lot of room for error. And if you, like you had mentioned, have a client that at the end of the conversation, you can't build this picture for them and lay out all the things that can go wrong, and you still decide to, okay, we can move forward, it's with one goal, and that goal is that you are going to get in that situation, you're going to see what exactly is happening through the eyes of the caregiver, and they're going to bring it back to you, and you're going to bring it back to the family and say, this is what's happening when we're not here. Okay, we've been in this situation now for a week. We spend 1 or 2 or 3 hours over this last week with this client. What in the world is happening when we're not here? If you're not here and we're not here, it's a danger, all right? And so we have protocols to say, hey, we can't be a part of this situation. We can't just be here for a 1-hour shift, because now we know that this client is set up for an unsafe environment, an unsafe situation, and it does give us a little bit more power to be able to go back to the family. But short shifts definitely require major communication and realistic expectations set up front if you are going to ever do them.
I love it. And so, touching a little bit more before I move on to the next one, I want to show this all to you folks. I'm going to show this one again, but this right here from the Straight Home Care Pulse Report again. These are the top 10 complaints from caregivers, because a big part of this business is recruiting caregivers as much as it is recruiting clients, right? And when you look at the number one complaint from caregivers, and I'll show it to you in big bold, and you can read it with me, it is inconsistent hours scheduling. That is the number one complaint of caregivers for years. And you read it. So the two top complaints with hours and scheduling were inconsistent hours, meaning not being able to get a steady schedule week to week. And then the second part of it is not getting enough hours in general. And you see where it says the second result is surprising given the general caregiver shortages most agencies are experiencing, but a very common complaint among caregivers. This may suggest that better scheduling may be able to compensate for some of the struggles of caregiver turnover. Minimum hours, right? This is exactly what I'm talking about. Overall, the top complaint from surveys where we analyzed was not getting consistent schedule week to week. When you have a 20-hour minimum, this is something that I do with my clients. And a lot of my clients, they fight me on it at first, but then they bite the bullet and they go to it. And every one of them has gone to it, has said to me, man, I wish I did this sooner. Man, I wish this straight from the get-go. Because when you have 20-hour minimums, then you now have shift schedules that you can offer to caregivers. And when caregivers come in, you can say, what shifts are you available to work? These are the shifts that we have. Do you want part-time, full-time, whatever? And now your week that you're setting up with care for somebody becomes maybe 15 to 18 different shifts, which makes your life easier from scheduling, makes the caregiver's life easier because it's consistent work week to week, which is exactly what they're complaining about from an industry problem standpoint. And you know who else is happy? The patient, because they get the care that they need and they have the ability to what? Keep home. Keep the patient home. That is the goal of this problem right here. And so moving on, the next problem that people face in their first year is what I call the churning and burning of caregivers through poor management. All right, and so I'm going to bring back up on the screen here, because the caregivers are a big part of this industry. If you're thinking of getting into this business, you have to be aware that caregivers are that's your bloodline, and that's a big challenge. And a lot of people underestimate that. That's why I'm talking about it now. I don't want you to churn and burn caregivers, but look at this. This is the caregiver turnover ratio for the last 5 years. It was in the 60 percentile, meaning if you hire 10 caregivers a year from now, you'll have 4 left, maybe 3 left. But all of a sudden, it's been getting worse over time. It isn't getting better, it's getting worse, right? 82%. 82% caregiver turnover ratio. I just told you the number one complaint, inconsistent hours. So that's one way, because my clients who do it, my clients, by the way, when I get them to do the things that we're talking about, their caregiver turnover ratio is around 40%. It's literally twice as good as what the industry average is. That's something to consider. So what I'm saying here, I put my clients' testimonies as the reason why I'm saying what I'm saying to you. I'm not just making this stuff up. Like, my clients are averaging this stuff. So that's huge with the minimums, but look at the other things that caregivers are complaining about. There's 10 things. Now, low pay, there's not much you can do about it. Caregiver is an entry-level position in healthcare. If a caregiver wants to make more money, become a nurse, become an LPN, become a doctor, become a therapist, more schooling, but more income. This is entry level, low pay comes with entry level. There's not much you can do with it. Benefits, not much we can do there. Not being compensated for travel time. Everything else, lack of communication, number 3. Disorganization on the part of management and office staff. Personality differences with supervisors, number 5. Going to number 7, number 8. Sent into cases without adequate introductions or care plans. Number 9, not open to feedback. And number 10, insufficient training. Six of the 10 complaints of caregivers have to do with how we manage them. 6 of the 10. And so when you add the inconsistent hours, that's 7. So if we can address the minimums, like you heard me say in the third problem, and then we manage our caregivers correctly, we go out, we start the case up. We spend a couple hours with the caregiver and the client on startup. We offer training support, ongoing training for the caregivers. We are coming out and managing our caregivers, because this is why this is an industry problem. The law says that you can send a caregiver into the house and come back 2 months later, which is 60 days later, to see how things are going. The problem with that is your average caregiver, if they're a CNA or a home health aide, went to school for 2 weeks and got a certificate that says they can take care of somebody. And companies are sending these CNAs, these home health aides, into people's house, starting the case up, and then saying, okay, manage this client now for 2 months before I come back and check on you. That's a huge problem. I have an entire program called Special Ops, all about how to help avoid that. And that's the reason why my clients retain so much better than the industry average, because we're adding a level of management in that most people don't, which address 6 of the 10 complaints. It doesn't make sense. When you think about a caregiver for the most part, CNA, HHA, this is a non-skilled worker. This is not a college graduate professional for the most part. So as a result of that, how can you expect somebody with a high school degree and a certificate to be able to work independently and handle all the challenges that our clients have? And when you think about our clients, you heard me say this at the very beginning, these are people who are end of life. You're dealing with people in their 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. You're literally dealing with centurions, people who've been alive for 100 years. They have some issues, and they need help. And to have a caregiver go in there without managing it properly, that's why caregivers walk off cases. That's why it's so hard to keep caregivers, and that's why the caregiver turnover ratio is 82%. So if I'm going to start a home care, this is why I'm putting this in here. If I'm going to start a home care company, I want to be aware of that. What can I do in my home care company differently, which you hear me talking about managing my caregivers better and spending more time with them and offering all the things. If I do these things, that should help me to be able to retain the caregivers that I have working for me longer. And if I'm better at retaining them, caregivers all speak to each other, it'll be easier for me to hire more caregivers, and my recruitment effort will be easier. And one thing I can tell you, my clients who have the lowest turnover ratio, the ones who have like a 20%, 25% turnover ratio, they're the ones that have the easiest time recruiting caregivers, because the caregivers who work for them say this is the good company to work for. Birds of a feather flock together. They tell their friends, and other people come over and want to work for that company too. So think about how you're going to manage that patient, how you're going to manage that client, and how you're going to manage that caregiver. At the end of the day, as crazy as it sounds, people like to be managed. Manage your caregivers properly, they'll stay with you and be loyal, and that'll help you to overcome one of the biggest challenges this entire industry is facing around the world. Jared, anything you want to add to that?
There's a lot I could add to it. Given the time here, I'll just hit on a few things. Number one, I never expect anybody to do anything I wouldn't do myself. And so getting into a home care company, I didn't have any background in home care. I went and got a certified nursing assistant degree. I went from a real estate broker to getting my CNA before starting my home care company. But what this did is allowed me to realize and relate to the care staff and be able to go in and fill shifts if I needed to fill shifts. And the staff knew that I would roll up my sleeves and I was willing to get my hands dirty. And that's just as a new company, that's as somebody starting, it's as close as you can start to get to start building that culture, because eventually culture is really going to be what is going to put you in a position where you have that longevity of caregivers. We have caregivers that have been with us since we've opened, essentially, at least that first year that we've opened. So always striving to create that atmosphere to where they know we have their back, that we respect them, and we have good personal boundaries between the two of us. Last thing on this, those of you who are going to be starting a home care company, you're going to have a low caregiver pool, and you're going to be really tempted. This will happen to you. You're going to have a shift that you need someone to fill, and you're going to ask somebody to do it, and they're going to do it, but they're going to say, but I'll tell you what, can I please have Thursday afternoon off if I fill this one in for you? Can I please just get Thursday afternoon off? And you say, no problem. Thanks for filling this shift. Thursday afternoon comes around. There's a shift that opens up, and that caregiver is free. They're just one phone call away, and they'll do it if you ask nice enough. Don't do it. One too many of those, it gets you on a downward spiral. And so just one extra tidbit of advice there to help you guys as you start with that care staff.
I love what Jared just said there. And, caregivers kind of go back to this. When you're recruiting caregivers, you got to give them work. So you can't just recruit caregivers without having work for them. That's why I put this in order. That's why I put number 2 higher. But to this point here, and I love what Jared said there with he did shifts. I covered shifts myself as well. And when you as the owner are willing to cover a shift and the word gets out to your caregivers that you're willing to, I'll do any part of the job necessary if I have to, that speaks volumes. And that brings me to the last challenge that people face, and that's office staff challenges. When I look at the business model and I look at all the people out there, your office staff are the most important people in your business. Now, some of us, when we get started, we're a one-man or a one-woman operation. Some of us are a husband and wife team, and some of us are going to have an office assistant or maybe a recruiter or somebody else coming in. We might have 2 or 3 people working with us initially to really get things going. Your office staff make or break your business. And I'm going to show you a picture right here of a funnel, and the way this works, and at least you see where it says right, the successful home care business owners understand that as the owner of the company, I am the most important person to my company, because if I leave, the company is no longer the company, all right? And I, as the CEO, should spend the majority of my time managing and supporting my staff, because when I've seen, and I had one of my clients last week who lost somebody, and every other week there's somebody who's lost a scheduler, lost a recruiter, lost a nurse or somebody. When you lose an office staff, that business is lucky to maintain revenue in the time of hiring somebody else and getting that person up to speed. In most instances, the business starts to dip a little bit. And so this is why I put this as the last one, because you really got to grow the business a little bit before you get to the point of having staff. But as you start to bring on that staff, remember, you don't want to just give it to anybody. You don't want to just hire your cousin or your brother or whoever because they're a nice person. You want to have somebody who knows what they're doing, and you want to make sure that you're supporting them properly, because now your staff should spend the majority of their time managing your caregivers. And your caregivers, they're the one that spend the majority of their time servicing your patients. And so when you understand that, and you give the priority to your office staff the way that you should, that's going to give you the success that you want. And so I'm just being mindful of the time here as I say that. Jared, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I would say that something you had mentioned earlier is that people may be launching as a sole owner, and that's something that we've allowed as a franchise system. But the number one piece of feedback that we've had from our franchisees is when they do hire that first office assistant or help in the office, is that they wish they would have done it sooner. And so it's actually something that we're looking at doing and mandating in our 2020 franchise agreement, is that they get that help out of the gate. And so there's only so much one person can do, and there's enough referral marketing time and energy that needs to be spent to where if you're going to have the flow of caregivers that you need equal amount of time filling that funnel as well. And so one person, unless it's doable, but you ain't getting much sleep. So I highly suggest you all find a partner. You get somebody, you hire that assistant, whatever that may be, but you have that as a part of your business plan.
Jared, I love that you said that, and because you saw me draw this back up, like everything comes back to number one, right? Making sure that you have enough revenue at startup so that you can do the marketing. Make sure that you're marketing so that you can get the phone to ring, and then keep your caregiver, and then get their office staff. They all go hand in hand, but it all comes back to, again, having the revenue at startup so you could do all of these things. And so finally, in closing, as you're listening to this, I'm going to, as an independent person myself, CareChoice, we were independent. So, and then this is why I brought Jared on here, because I represent the voice of the independents. Jared represents the voice of the franchisor. So from my experience in working with both, I find that if you are not the kind of person to follow the rules, right? You don't want somebody to tell you how to run your business. You don't like, you understand, bringing in support and stuff, but you're not going to do what somebody else is going to ask of you. You're not coachable. You'd rather just do it your own way. And there's nothing wrong with that. Like, I don't want you, I'm not bashing that. All right. But what I will say, for that individual, being part of a franchise isn't going to work, because there's the franchise model. And this is where, to the other person who's listening, if you're the kind of person who give me the recipe and I'm going to bake this cake, right? I want to make a chocolate cake. I can figure out how to make a chocolate cake, or I can go and get the recipe. I want the recipe, right? Then that's the person who goes franchise. Because when you go franchise, they're going to give you everything that you need to get started and get established, and they have a vested interest in supporting you. Now, the only advantage I would say to the independent side of it is, with the independent, you don't have restrictions of territory, you don't have a royalty and everything else. So, there's advantages to both. If you like to figure it out, you're going to find your own way. You don't want to get involved with royalty. You don't want to be restricted by territory. Then independent's the way to go. If you're the kind of person who's like, I don't care about the restrictions, I want the support, I want the drive, I want everything else, then franchise is the way to go. And there is no right or wrong way. It's what's best for you. And so, Jared, real quick, because I know you got to go, and I promised everybody an hour. Anything that you want to say on this topic, franchise or independent, what would you say to somebody listening?
One of the first things when I talk to somebody about this is their availability of time, because we can get somebody up and running very, very quickly. We have everything in place. We've got the marketing materials. We've got the processes to start the business, the contracts, the paperwork, the policies, the procedures, the handbooks, everything that you need is there. So if you have time and you're willing to spend a year and a half to create these things and do it right, then yes, independent can definitely be a solution. If you want to shorten that learning curve and hit the street quicker, franchising is the way to go. And not only just being an independent or just being a franchise, an important part of a franchise system that a lot of people don't realize is the collaboration that you have, not only with the franchisors and the ongoing support that you have, but with other franchisees. We have access now to 10 different owners who are all learning and are all have been in different places that a lot of these other new and up and coming franchisees are going to be, right? They are a resource to you. We have collaborative online groups that we meet once a month, just talking about our goals and our accomplishments and having accountability built into the system. So independent, sometimes I feel some people may feel like they're on an island and a little bit more secluded, to where if you want a little bit more of that team environment, that collaborative environment, that extra, shoulder to lean on and that support, franchising may be for you. So I'm sure I could talk a lot more about it, but I know we're running out of time.
Yeah, and so, in end here, and thank you so much, Jared. I appreciate you being on here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Is it worth it to the right person who understands all these nuances, to the person who's going to understand these things and really be smart about it? I mean, why did I take an hour of my time? Why did I take an hour of Jared's time to do this for you? We did it for you because I want to welcome you to the home care industry. I want you to be a part of this community, franchise or independent, right? I want you to make the right decision. But if you're going to do it, I want you to do it right, because when you do it right, you're going to take care of the patients. And when you do it right, you're not going to sweat about how much money you're laying out. When you do it right, you're going to grow and you're going to make a difference. So it is worth it as long as you're prepared for it. Now, if you have any questions about, how to get started and what you want to do with this business, you can take down this number. You don't call us right now. You just listen to it. I absorb, digest everything that you heard here. Write down some questions, sleep on it a day or two, call us Monday, Tuesday next week, and then maybe we can answer some questions for you about if this is the right business for you and how to move forward with it. We're here to help you. It's a great business to be in. It's a rewarding business to be in. And when you really grow it big, you make a lot of money too. I mean, it hits all the bases. There's a lot of work that goes into it, and you want to make sure that if you are going to do it, you do it right. So, thank you so much for your time. Jared, thank you so much for being here, my brother. Safe travels to your airport and where you got to fly to. I'm heading to Atlantic City, New Jersey. I'll talk to you all soon. Take care, my friends.
Those looking to franchise, feel free to reach out. 402-281-0738 or franchising@aplaceathome.com.
You got it.
Thank you. Thank you, Steve.